Okay, good morning, everyone. This lecture recording is on. In this lecture recording, we will discuss the topic of Russian formalism and new criticism. We have covered this lecture in the classroom, okay, and this is a recording, okay, for your reference, yeah, in case you missed the class or something, okay. So, all right, so let's have a look at formalism and criticism and new criticism, right? What is it? What is the history, okay, and what does it contribute to the study of literature? So, Russian formalism, or formalism as it's known in Russia, uh, gives us this. Russian formalism and new criticism both appear at different parts of the world. So, Russian formalism comes out of Russia. New criticism is, is a literary theory that comes out of the West. Okay, so mostly centered around Britain and America. Okay, the English speaking world. All right. Now they may come out of different parts of the world, but both of these literary theory focus on the same ideas. Okay, they have the exact same ideas, which is to treat the text, the literary text, as an isolated island, an autonomous, self-sustaining specimen of writing. Okay, it is language arts, and therefore language arts must be able to stand on its own. Okay, that is the general idea behind formalism and new criticism. Okay, now let's have a look, right? So these are the things that we are going to cover in this topic. Okay, I'll give you an introduction to formalism. Okay, we will talk about Roman Jakobson, a Russian literary theorist and more of a linguist, actually. Okay, Roman Jakobson, and then we will look at Victor Shklovsky's theory of defamiliarization, and then we will move on to new criticism. Okay, we're going to look at new criticism and we'll figure out how, and we'll see that it is very similar to the ideas of the Russian formalists. Okay, we will look at William Emerson. Okay, William Emerson is a poet, okay, and a literary critic. He gives us this process of close reading, which is still used in literature. And then I will talk about the fallacies in literary criticism. This is a theory or ideas, okay, uh, given to, proposed by Wimsatt and Monroe Beardsley. Okay, so we'll look at that. Two fallacies in literary criticism. As a result of this fallacies or proposal of fallacies and so on, okay, new criticism and Russian formalism is also accused of elitism. Okay, so there is a bit of a backlash on Russian formalism as well. Okay, because people think that you shouldn't be thinking of literature this way, and so on. Okay, and then we will conclude. Okay, so where does this idea of elitism come from? All right, first of all, okay, what is elitism? Elitism is this feeling of superiority. Okay, you feel that you are right and everyone else is wrong. Okay, so that is elitism. Okay, so I suppose you can say that the new critics and Russian formalists are often seen as elitist figures, okay, because they feel that they are right in the way that they analyze literature, okay, and that everyone else is wrong, okay. Hence, why Beardsley and and Wimsatt, proposes these fallacies in literature. But we'll talk about that later. Okay. First of all, let's figure out what is formalism and new criticism. Right. So, if you can recall our previous lectures, in our previous lectures, we looked at how the theories of psychology can be taken and used in literary criticism, right? In reading of literature, we apply our understanding of psychology. Hence, you have psychoanalysis, for example. So, in with the theories of psychology or theories of psychoanalysis, we say that the story, okay, is a projection of the author's own trauma or psychological state or whatsoever, right? And then we can look at the individual characters in the story and analyze them using theories of psychology, right? Figure out their personality, their complexes, right? Their phobias or whatsoever, right? That's all fun and entertaining. Now, what does Russian formalism and new criticism bring to the table? Okay, with these two theories, what we're doing essentially is taking the theory of linguistics and applying it to literature. Okay, and what is linguistic? Okay, linguistic is the scientific study of language, right? And because of that, because it is a scientific study of language, what this process, okay, proposes to do is to analyze literature using a scientific lens. Okay, so both of these movements, although they come out from the different parts of the world, both of them argue that the text should be analyzed scientifically based on its internal structure, meaning you look at the text and nothing else. Okay, so rather than looking at the historical background or the author's personal life. Okay, in other words, you study the text based on what it offers, right? Based on what is on the paper and so on. Okay, so while they operated in different parts of the world, okay, and had distinct political realities, they share the title of formalist theories, okay, because they both treated the literature as an autonomous, self-contained piece of art. Autonomous, self-contained, meaning you don't look at anything else, right? The poem, for example, is good enough on its own. Okay. All right. So the term formalism, right? Okay, you can take the root word there, form. Okay, form implying looking at the design, the shape, okay, the build, the construction of the art, right? Or in this case, our works of literature. Okay, so both formalism and new criticism are considered as intrinsic criticism, right? So this is where we have this struggle between intrinsic and extrinsic criticism. Okay, what's the difference? All right, intrinsic criticism um, and extrinsic criticism are two opposing forces in literary theory, and it's centered around where you look to find meaning of the text. Intrinsic criticism means that you are looking inside the pages of the text, right? Inside the poem, inside the novel, inside the short story, and so on. Extrinsic criticism means you are looking outside, you're looking beyond the text, right? Into the real world. Okay? That's extrinsic criticism. So it means that to gain a better understanding of literature that you read, you look at the history, look at the author's biography, you look at understanding in culture, and so on. Okay, you look at society. okay, and the conditions of society and all that. Okay, so that is extrinsic criticism. Um, okay, now formalism is largely intrinsic study. Okay, it is an intrinsic uh, uh, criticism. Okay, meaning that you focus on what is on the page. Okay, all right. Now let's go to Roman Jakobson. Okay, so Roman Jakobson was a Russian American linguist and literary theorist. Okay, he is more of a linguist actually. Okay, Russian American because he was born in Russia, but later on he moves to Europe and then moves to uh, New York. Okay, where so basically he brought a lot of his knowledge, his understanding into the literary circle and linguistic circles in America. He argued that poetry should be analyzed through the mechanics of language rather than biography or history. Roman Jakobson famously declared that the true objective, all right, of literary study is not literature as a whole, but rather it is literariness. Okay, what is literariness? It is what sets literature apart from normal everyday writing. Okay, what makes it different? What makes works of literature stand out? Okay, when compared to normal everyday writing. Okay, or what makes a poem different from a textbook, for example. Okay, that is literariness. That is the essence of literariness. Okay, now, Roman Jakobson introduced the six functions of language. Okay, six functions of language. So different reasons or purpose that we use language. Okay, so that this will tell you that um, formalism and new criticism is largely centered around linguistics ideas, right? So, six functions of language. What is it? The first function is referential. Referential means that we are focused on the information. Okay, we are providing information. We are describing what is there, right? So, for example, you tell your friends or you tell your classmates there is pizza in the pantry, right? So, in the pantry, there's pizza. Okay, all right. So you're delivering the message, right? That is referential function. The second function is expressive. Okay, it shares. It is the you're sharing your feelings or your opinions. So you tell people, for example, a Domino's pizza is better than Pizza Hut, right? You're sharing information. You're sharing feelings. Okay, your opinions, right? Number three, the third function of language is conative. Okay, conative meaning you're trying to influence people, you're trying to call or command others to do something. Okay, so for example, there's pizza in the pantry, and you tell your friend, okay, hey, save me a slice, I'll be right there, right? Save me a slice, right? You're commanding you're telling your friends, okay, please save a slice of pizza for me. Okay, meta and the next number four, okay, is meta language, okay, or metalingual function. Metalingual means that you are using language to ask or to discuss about language. Okay, so that is very meta, right? So for example, if your friend says, okay, there is pizza in the pantry, right? There's pizza in the pantry, and you ask your friend, okay, were you offering me some, right? Can I have some, right? Sorry, you're asking, right? What do you mean by that? Okay, what do you mean by that, right? Were you offering some pizza to me? Okay, so that is metalingual. We are checking what the other what the message is in the language, right? So for example, you're asking someone, what do you mean by that? What do you mean by what you said, right? uh Number five is the phatic. Okay, phatic function. Phatic function is where language is used for the sake of interaction. Okay, so this is something like you know small talk, for example. Okay, is a phatic function. Okay, small talk, making small talk, right? Why do we make small talk? All right, it is to avoid, the awkward silence or something. Right? So you go to the pantry and there's pizza in the pantry. You go to the pantry, right? Everyone's eating pizza. You don't just stand around awkwardly, right? Don't just stand around quietly eating your pizza, right? No, you make small talk. You say things, right, to fill the void of awkwardness, right? Of awkward silence. So what do you say? You say, good pizza, huh? Yeah, right? Oh, sedap, right? Okay, so that is fatigue function. Okay. Now the last function of language is poetic. Okay. So poetic function, according to Jacobson here, is that you are you're producing the message for its own sake. It is language for its own sake. It serves no conventional purposes other than to demonstrate that you can do it. Okay. So, for example, writing a poem about pizza, for example, right? That is a poetic function of language. Okay. So, literary criticism, he says, is focused on the analysis of this poetic function. Okay. All right. So, another Russian theorist by the name of Viktor Shklovsky argued that art exists to make the familiar strange. Okay, to make familiar things strange. Okay, so that we can experience the world freshly, breaking free from habitual automated perception. Okay, so he believed that literature should be intentionally rough, okay, or difficult linguistic obstacle. Okay, so poems or whatsoever should be challenging to the reader. Poems should look and read, okay, strangely. Okay, because what this is going to do is it's going to slow down the act of reading and force the audience to feel the texture of the words rather than racing straight towards the meaning. Reading a poem is should be different from reading a textbook. Okay, so reading a poem should be different from reading an instruction manual, for example. Okay. Okay, so this is the concept of defamiliarization. Okay, so you take something that is familiar, that is common, okay, and you defamiliarize it. You make it strange again. Okay, so why is this important? According to Shklovsky here, right, he argues that human beings go through life and their perception of the world becomes habitualized or automatic. Okay, when you see a table, a house, or a partner every single day, you stop actually looking at them and you merely recognize them as formulas. What does that mean? What does that mean? When you are used to things, okay, when you are used to things, they become habitualized, they become automatic. You stop noticing them. Okay, for example, okay, if let's say you come to my class, and every day in my class, right, I give you a candy. Okay, I give you a small candy, right? Here's a sugus, for example. Here's a mentos, right? I give you a candy. The first time you get it, right? First time I give everyone a candy, you might be surprised. It is very uh, novel, right? Novel meaning it's new, right? Novel. Okay, so I give you a candy in class. You come to class, I give you a candy. The first time it happens, it is surprising, it is pleasant, right? Oh, it's from, yeah, right, it's fun, right? But then I do it for the second class, I do it for the third, I do it for the fourth, the fifth, okay, all the way to throughout the semester, right? After a while, it becomes habitualized. It stops being unique. Okay, it stops being fun. Okay, and that is called the novelty fade. We talked about this when we were talking about apa? The hedonic treadmill, right? Okay, so that is novelty fade. What is new becomes habitualized, it becomes automatic, right? It becomes boring, right? So the same thing can be felt with words, with language. Okay, we use it every day. We use words every day when we talk, right? When we write, it becomes habitualized. Nothing is special anymore, right? So the purpose of art, the purpose of literature is to take these habitualized words, right, and to make them unique again, to make you notice it again, okay, to make it special again, right? So that is defamiliarization. Shklovsky warned that this automated life swallows up objects, clothes, and even the dread of war. Okay, art exists to destroy the sensory numbness. Okay, and by using difficult, unusual, or highly stylized language, literature slows down the reading process and makes the familiar world look brand new again. Okay, so according to Tchaikovsky, that is the purpose of art. That is the purpose of literature. Okay, to make it unique again. Right. If you look at Ezra Pound's poem here, okay, in the station of the metro, okay, the apparition of these faces in the crowd, petals on a wet black bough, right? So um, look at this poem, right? This is new, this is unique. Okay, if you have been studying literature for a while, you've been into many different literature classes, right? You get poems almost every time, right? And poems can be what, five or six stanzas, 4 lines each, right? Okay, it becomes habitualized after a while, right? Or today you come to class, oh, it's another poem, 6 stanzas, right? Another poem, 6 stanzas as well. Okay, you become used to it, or you start expecting it already, right? And then here you come to class, you see, you are presented with this poem, only 2 lines, right, by Ezra Pound here. Okay, every word in the poem matters, right? Even the title matters, right? So it is now unique, it is now unfamiliar. You will look at that and you'll stop and you'll think, right? You'll think, this is unexpected. This is new. This is strange. Okay, I've never seen a poem consisting of only 2 lines, very sparse word usage and so on. Especially if are used to reading romantic poetry, right? Romantic as in English romanticism, William Wordsworth and so on. Kind of, oh, very flowery language, longer than it needs to be and so on, right? And then suddenly uh, you know, you are hit with Ezra Pound. 2 lines only, very sparse, right? This is a kind of poem called imagism. Okay, imagism. Imagism meaning it gives you a flash of image in your mind as you read the poem, right? So only 2 lines, okay? And that's new, that's unique, okay? That is unfamiliar, okay? It is novel, right? And that's the point of literature, according to Tchaikovsky. Make things new again. Okay, now let's move on to the other side of the world. Okay, away from Russia, okay, we have new criticism also coming out with a very similar idea. Okay, um, the criticism of literature should be focused on language. The text is an island, it's an isolated island. Focus on intrinsic criticism, don't look at anything else, right? That's the idea here. So new criticism, why is it called new criticism, right? Because if you look at the date here, it's almost 100 years old now, right? Why is it still new? It's new for the time, okay? Because it presented a new way of analyzing literature. If you can recall our lecture on traditional approaches, right? Traditional approaches means you look at history of the text, you look at author's biography, and so on, right? So new criticism came out and introduced a new way of looking at literature. the proper way, right, of looking at literature according to them. Proper way according to them, right? So uh, this dominated American and British academic circles in the 1930s and 1950s. Like formalism, they view the piece of writing must be treated as a self-contained autonomous object, right? The critic's job is to identify the internal tensions within literature, such as paradoxes, ironies, and ambiguities, right? To demonstrate how the text seamlessly resolves them into a unified theme within a poem. Okay, so you look for these things, right? One of the pioneers of new criticism is this man with a radical neck beard here. Okay, this is William Emerson. He was an English literary critic and a poet as well. He was famous for transforming the word ambiguity, okay, from a term that is very negative in criticism into a very positive literary value. Okay, ambiguity. What does ambiguity mean? It means that something is vague, okay, or something that is unclear, right? That's what ambiguity means. Okay, um, previously ambiguity was kind of a negative, okay, because it gives you no clear answer. Okay, William Emerson turns it around. He says ambiguity is good because now the text can have multiple layers of meaning, okay, and you can argue about that. You can make students argue about that, right? Okay, so that's good. All right, so he argued that the text's multiple overlapping layers of meaning are what makes it rich and valuable. Okay, Emerson championed the practice of examining literary texts word by word, being hyper-focused. This hyper-focused analysis of linguistic properties became the ultimate blueprint for the new critique. Okay, so you have to read the text word by word. Okay, hyper-focus. Okay, this is perhaps something you have done as well. Okay, in previous literary classes. Okay, this is called close reading. All right, so take this line, for example: the pristine snow choked the garden path, right? So one sentence, okay? A literary critique, a new critique, right, would examine this sentence word by word, okay? And it will look at the meaning of those carefully selected words, okay? And make conclusions based on that, right? So, for example, the pristine snow choked the garden path. So it looks at the word pristine, pristine meaning pure, untouched, innocent, right? Whereas how is that juxtaposed with the word choked, which has a very violent meaning, right? Smothering, suffocating, death, right? Killing, right? So that's choked. So you can make the conclusion that this line, okay, is trying to reflect this idea that nature can be both pure and beautiful, but can also be destructive, right? Choke. Okay, so that is close reading, and it is used again and again and again by the new critiques. Okay. Now here's a problem with new criticism and um, and formalism. Okay, it's good. It's all well and good that you introduce a new way of reading literature. Okay, now it becomes a problem when you tell people that they are doing it wrong. Okay, when you tell other people that they are doing it wrong. Okay, that the right way of reading literature is this new way. Okay, that's where you get the allegations of elitism, of arrogance. Yeah, so this is the concept of fallacies in literary criticism. Okay, so this is introduced by Wimsatt and Monroe Beardsley. Okay, these two gentlemen here. Okay, so they introduced this concept of fallacies in literary criticism. What are fallacies? Fallacies is errors in reasoning, errors in arguments, okay, that you make when you judge works of literature. They introduced this concept to prove that the text must be analyzed purely as autonomous object, okay, independent of both its creator and its audience, okay. So there are two fallacies that they introduce. The first one is called the intentional fallacy. Intentional here means referring to the intention of the author. Okay, this is the mistake of judging a literary work based on the author's intent, what the author intended to say or mean. Okay, so it states that a poem belongs to the public and not the author. Okay, the poem or works of literature. So once a poem is published, right, it is no longer the property of the author, according to them, right? So, what the author is trying to say, what the author intended with the poem, should not matter anymore. Okay, so once published, the author's biography, psychological motives, all right, private journals, or whatsoever becomes irrelevant to the words on the page. It forces the reader to look at only the evidence inside the text rather than relying on external author interviews or letters or whatsoever. It's basically saying if you make a connection between the poem and the author's biography, right? You're doing it wrong. You are uncultured. Yeah, you're uncultured in your ways. You're doing it wrong, right? The other fallacy in literary criticism that these two introduced was the affective fallacy. What is affective? Affective basically means your emotions, your feelings, and so on. Okay, this is they say this is the mistake of judging literary work based on emotional effect on the reader. Okay, so it warns that judging a text by how it makes you feel, okay, leads to purely subjective or unstable or unreliable criticism. Okay, it demands that criticism remains purely objective. Okay, so meaning if you watch a film, for example, and the film is so sad it makes you cry, right? And you say, "Oh, this film is good because it's very emotional and so on," right? You are uncultured. You are doing it wrong. Yeah, you're doing it wrong. Okay, it says basically you're letting your emotions disrupt this very scientific analysis of this work of literature. Okay, and that is wrong. Okay, you are uncultured that way, right? They say. So instead of talking about how a poem makes you cry, okay, a critique must analyze what structural elements inside the poem cause that emotional tension. Okay, so they say look at the mechanics of the poem, right? What is it that's pulling at your heartstring? Yeah? Is it the arrangement of the words or whatsoever? If you're talking about film, okay, don't talk about how the film make you cry, but look at what mechanics in the film causes you to have that emotion, that emotional reaction. Is it the dialogue? Is it the acting of the characters of the actors? Is it the setting of the camera, the mood of the lighting, the background music? Maybe analyze all of that. Okay, be a role. This basically they're expecting you to be, chat gpt, okay, and analyze a poem like that, okay, which is which is which isn't right, yeah, in my opinion. Okay, it's not very good. Okay, because you remove the human aspect of literature, right? You look at intentional fallacy just now, right? It says that the author's background, author's intention does not matter. That's not entirely correct, right? Because, for example, new critics love to use the writings, the poems of the poet John Keats, okay, because it is very, very rich in its description and language and so on. Okay, but you are not. But according to them, you're not supposed to talk about the author, John Keats, at all, his background or whatsoever. Okay, to them, it does not matter that John Keats, suffered from tuberculosis, from TB at a very young age, right? And then later on died very young as well. To them, it does not matter. Okay, to them, what happens in John Keats' life does not matter. Does not impact the writing in any way, right? But don't you think it does matter, right? Don't you think those things are important? When you suffer from a terminal illness like TB, back then, during John Keats' time, TB was a terrible death sentence. Basically, you die very, very slowly from consumption and so on, right? Um, that is, don't you think that would change your perspective on life? Don't you think that would impact the way that you look at the world, look at nature, appreciate nature, and so on, right? But the new critics say, don't look at that. It does not matter. Yeah. Focus on the text only. When you tell people that they are wrong, okay, they don't like that. Okay. So this is where the claims of elitism and arrogance come from. Okay, because it's not only that they are uh, giving us a different way of looking at literature, but they're telling us that we have been doing it wrong all this time. And if you let your feelings get in the way, you are uncultured. Yeah, and mm, that's not very good. People don't really like that. Yeah, arguments of elitism. Okay, so in 1960s and 1970s, okay, a lot of other critiques have emerged to challenge new criticism, right? The Marxist critiques, the feminist critiques, the post-colonial critiques, and so on. They come out in drove, right, to challenge new criticism. Marxist theories like Terry Eagleton and Raymond Williams, for example, argued that new criticism serves capitalist and bourgeois interests. Okay, bourgeois meaning upper classes, right? What it does is, when you cut off works of literature from social reality, what you're doing is you are making poems and literature and so on a luxury item, a toy, right, for wealthy elite upper classes. You remove the purpose, the message of the poem or works of literature, right? You make it disconnected from the real world. And you know that people have been using works of literature, poems, stories, and so on, as a medium for telling messages, right? For sending messages, talking about the world, right? So when you remove that context, when you disconnect literature from the real world, what happens? It becomes useless. It becomes a toy, essentially. Okay, that's the argument there. New historicists like Stephen Greenblatt, for example, argued that literature cannot be separated from power structures. New critics attempt to detach art from political history as a deliberate way to keep academia safe and sterile. Okay, literature becomes disconnected from real-world activism. All right, so let's conclude then. Okay, let's reach our conclusion here. The journey through these literary theories reveal a profound shift in how humanity values the written words. Russian formalists treated literature as a precise mechanical machine, okay, through their scientific and linguistic analysis of poems and so on. New criticism gave us a permanent and invaluable tool of close reading, which we can assign to our students to do, right? And have them look at the poem word by word and so on. So we take those two as greatest contribution to literary criticism. But we must also recognize the negative aspect that new criticism has brought, right? They declared that the poem is an isolated island. They ban extrinsic criticism, extrinsic information, right? They say that it is fallacy. If you rely on extrinsic information, you let your feelings get in the way, you are doing it wrong. They say you are uncultured, right? They do it right. You are doing it wrong, they say. And unfortunately, people don't like that. Yeah. New criticism has disconnected literature from the real world. And people don't like that. Okay, so that is it for formalism and new criticism. Thank you very much for listening. Okay, I'll see you in the next lecture.